I was 18 years old, and it had been 10 years since my father died in a tragic road accident. Since then, it had just been me and my mom in our big, old house. That night, Mom was at a friend's get-together and told me she'd be back late. So I decided to make the most of the evening and invited my friends over for a movie night. Ella, Amanda, and Sam arrived about an hour later. We got the snacks ready and ordered some food. It was supposed to be a fun night, just us hanging out and watching movies. Ella, with her love for horror, insisted we watch something truly terrifying. We all agreed, trying to act tough. The movie started off exciting, but soon it became clear that this was no ordinary horror flick. Each scene was more terrifying than the last. We all tried to hide our fear, not wanting to seem childish, but I could see the fear in their eyes. A mirror of my own. I could feel my heart pounding with every jump scare, my palms sweating as I clutched the armrest of the couch. As the movie progressed, the tension in the room grew thicker. The shadows seemed to creep closer, and every creak of the old house made us jump. My mind kept playing tricks on me, making me see things in the corners of my vision that weren't really there, but I couldn't show my fear. I had to be brave, had to keep it together for my friends. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the movie ended. We all sat there trying to act cool, but it was obvious that we were all shaken. Amanda admitted it was the scariest movie she'd ever seen, and we all agreed. We started discussing the scariest parts, trying to laugh it off, but the fear lingered. Ella got up to get some juice from the kitchen. We heard her footsteps fade away, followed by the clinking of glasses. Suddenly, her scream pierced the air. It was a blood-curdling sound that made my heart skip a beat. We all rushed to the kitchen, panic gripping us. "Ella, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling. She was standing by the window, her face pale as a sheet. I saw something from the kitchen window, glowing eyes of a black, shadowy creature. My blood ran cold. We checked the window, trying to calm her down and see for ourselves. But there was nothing there, just the quiet darkness outside. We reassured her it was probably just her imagination playing tricks after the scary movie. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We went back to the living room, trying to brush off the incident, but an uneasy silence had settled over us. Then, just as we were beginning to relax, a loud knocking sound echoed through the house. We all froze, fear gripping us once more. "Did you hear that?" Sam whispered, his eyes wide with fear. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "My mom always calls before coming home. It can't be her." The knocking continued, louder and more urgent. Panic set in. Who could it be at this hour? I mustered up the courage and, with Sam by my side, approached the door. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. Silence. There was no answer. The knocking continued, relentless. I exchanged a nervous glance with Sam. We were both scared out of our wits, but we had to do something. I slowly reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. Just as I was about to turn it, the knocking stopped. The sudden silence was even more terrifying. We stood there, holding our breath, waiting for something to happen. But there was nothing, just the eerie stillness of the house. We decided to check the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked. Every shadow seemed to hide something sinister, and every creak of the old house made us jump. We returned to the living room, sitting in a tight circle. The fear was palpable, hanging in the air like a dark cloud. We tried to convince ourselves it was just a prank, maybe someone trying to scare us because they knew we were watching a horror movie. But deep down, none of us really believed it. The hours dragged on, and the fear slowly subsided, replaced by an uneasy calm. We stayed together for the rest of the night, not wanting to be alone. Every little noise made us jump, and every shadow seemed to move. The fear had turned into something almost tangible, a presence in the room with us. Even now, I'm not sure what we saw or heard that night, but I do know one thing. Some shadows are best left alone, because sometimes the real horror isn't on the screen. It's right outside your door. The memories of that night still haunt me, a reminder that some things are better left unexplored. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison of fear. We never talked about that night again, but I know we all remember it. The night we watched the scariest movie ever and faced something far more terrifying in the shadows of my own home.
I was 17 years old, and it had been a strange day. My parents had left to visit my uncle, who had a bad road accident while driving his truck. This left me home alone in our old house. It was the first time I was alone for such a long period, and at first, I enjoyed the solitude. I spent the afternoon glued to my phone, scrolling through social media, playing games, and chatting with friends. But after a while, the novelty wore off, and I grew bored. Deciding to make use of my time, I figured I could declutter my room. I started sorting through my drawers, throwing out old papers, and rearranging my books. While doing so, I remembered a bag full of my old pictures and childhood memorabilia that I had always wanted to go through. It was stored somewhere in the attic. The attic always had a creepy vibe, and I usually avoided it. But today, driven by boredom and nostalgia, I decided to face my fear. I made my way to the attic, every step echoing in the quiet house. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, sending a shiver down my spine. The attic was dark and musty, filled with old furniture and boxes covered in dust. I rummaged through the clutter, shifting boxes and old furniture. Finally, I found it, a dusty old bag hidden in a corner. I opened it and was instantly transported back to my childhood. There were toys I had long forgotten, old currency notes, collectibles, and most importantly, photographs. I sat there for what felt like hours, drowning in the memories those items brought back. As evening turned into night, I realized how quiet and dark the house had become. The only light in the attic was a dim bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A creepy feeling started to settle over me. The attic, which had always given me the chills, felt even more oppressive now that I was alone. A thought struck me hard. How did I manage to come up here alone? I usually couldn't even think of stepping foot in the attic when everyone was home. Now here I was, in the very place that terrified me the most. My heart began to pound and I found myself frozen with fear. The quiet of the attic seemed to grow louder, each creak and groan of the old house amplifying my anxiety. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I decided it was time to leave. As I made my way back, halfway down the attic stairs, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was music, soft, classical music playing from the attic. My body went rigid with fear. There shouldn't be anyone else in the house. The music was coming from a record player that had been stored up there for years. Panic surged through me, and I bolted down the stairs, not daring to look back. I ran to my room and slammed the door shut, my back pressed against the wall, trembling. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the fear that had settled in my chest told me otherwise. I sat there, my mind racing. Something was off about that evening. I felt an unsettling presence in the house. I was alone, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The music from the attic continued to play, its haunting melody filling the silence. As the night wore on, I remained huddled in my room, every noise making me jump. The shadows seemed to move on their own, and the house creaked as if it was alive. I could feel eyes on me, an unseen presence that made my skin crawl. Hours passed, but the fear didn't fade. I kept my phone close, my fingers hovering over the emergency call button. I thought about calling my parents, but what would I tell them? That I was scared of the attic music? They'd probably just tell me it was my imagination. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The music eventually stopped, but the eerie silence that followed was even worse. I couldn't sleep. I sat there, wide awake, until the first light of dawn broke through the windows. When my parents finally returned, I tried to tell them about the music, the fear I felt, but they just brushed it off as a product of my overactive imagination. They didn't understand the terror I experienced that night. Even now, the memory of that night haunts me. I avoid the attic at all costs. The thought of what happened up there, the music playing on its own, the feeling of not being alone, still sends chills down my spine. I'll never know what truly happened that night, but one thing is certain. That house, my home, was never the same for me again.
My name is Lucy, and I live in a small village. It was a cold December day when my parents decided to drive to the city for their monthly shopping. It was a 2-hour drive, but I was fine with being alone. I never really felt scared. I spent the evening watching DIY art and craft videos on my phone while eating noodles. The cozy warmth of our house contrasted sharply with the biting winter chill outside. As I was lost in my crafts, a sudden knock on the door broke my concentration. It was unusual for anyone to visit me, especially at this hour. Curiosity and a hint of apprehension gripped me as I approached the door. I called out, "Who is it?" A man's voice responded, "I'm Frederick, your dad's friend. Open the door." I hesitated. I had never heard of a Frederick from my dad. I knew all of his friends, and this name was unfamiliar. I replied, "My dad isn't home right now. If you need to speak to him, you can call him." The man's voice came back, more insistent. "I got a call from the hospital. They said your dad has had an accident and is in bad shape. You need to come with me." My heart stopped. The thought of my parents in trouble filled my eyes with tears. I thought this might be why they were late. I was about to unlock the door when a thought struck me. It would be better to call my dad directly and confirm. With trembling hands, I dialed his number. The phone rang a few times before he picked up. "Hello, sweetheart. I'm sorry we're running late. We should be home in about 20 minutes. Are you doing okay?" Relief washed over me at the sound of his voice. "Dad, I'm fine. I was worried. There's a man at the door saying you had an accident and that I need to go with him. He says his name is Frederick." There was a brief pause, then my dad's voice turned serious. "Lucy, listen to me carefully. Do not open the door for anyone. We don't know anyone named Frederick. Lock all the doors and windows and stay inside. We'll be home soon." Panic surged through me. Who was this man standing outside, and why had he lied to me? I glanced towards the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. The sinister reality of the situation hit me hard. I was alone, and someone was trying to trick me into opening the door. I quickly secured all the locks and checked the windows, making sure everything was secure. I could hear the man outside, still trying to convince me to open the door. His voice was calm, almost soothing, but I knew better now. I sat on the couch, every noise in the house amplified by my fear. The wind howled outside, and the branches of the old oak tree scraped against the windows, making eerie sounds that seemed to echo the tension in my heart. I hugged my knees to my chest, shivering, not just from the cold, but from the terror of the unknown. Minutes felt like hours. I kept glancing at the clock, willing my parents to come home faster. The man's attempts to get in gradually stopped, but the silence that followed was even more unnerving. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. Finally, I heard the familiar sound of our car pulling into the driveway. I rushed to the window and saw my parents getting out, relief flooding through me. I opened the door just as they were about to unlock it themselves and threw myself into their arms, tears streaming down my face. My dad held me tight, his voice soothing. "It's okay, Lucy. We're here now. You're safe." I explained everything that had happened, and my dad's face grew darker with concern. We called the local authorities, but by the time they arrived, the man was long gone. The police took my statement and promised to patrol the area more frequently. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the man. Who was he, and what were his intentions? The thought of what could have happened if I had opened the door haunted me. Our village, once a place of comfort and safety, now felt shadowed by an unknown threat. Even though my parents were back, and the house was once again filled with warmth and security, I knew things had changed. I had learned a hard lesson that day about trust and caution. The memory of the stranger at the door and his chilling deception stayed with me, a reminder that even in the safest places, danger can sometimes come knocking.
My husband and I had found our dream home on the outskirts of town, a secluded property nestled within a sprawling expanse of woods where tranquility reigned under the canopy of ancient oaks and towering pines. Our 2 loyal German shepherds, Max and Luna, were as much a part of our family as the sturdy walls that sheltered us from the elements. One rainy evening, with my husband away on a business trip, I found myself alone with the dogs, their restlessness mirroring the storm's restive energy. Seeking to ease their agitation, I let them out into the yard to roam and explore, their barks echoing through the night air as they bounded across the rain-soaked grass. From the shelter of our porch, I watched with a mixture of amusement and affection as they chased each other through the downpour, their tails wagging furiously despite the weather. But then, their playful antics abruptly ceased, replaced by a sudden intensity as they fixated on something beyond my line of sight. Curiosity mingled with unease as I approached cautiously, squinting through the rain to discern the object of their attention. My heart skipped a beat when I saw them, noses pressed against the rusted door of our old shed, their bodies taut with alertness, barking furiously into the darkness within. A terrible stench assaulted my senses as I drew nearer, a combination of musty earth and something more sinister, a scent that spoke of neglect and desperation. Fear prickled at the back of my neck as I reached for the shed door, hesitating for a moment before swinging it open, unsure of what, or who, I might find lurking within. To my horror, a disheveled figure burst forth from the shadows, wielding a shovel with a frantic desperation that sent my heart racing. He stumbled past me, his eyes wild with fear and desperation, narrowly missing my vigilant dogs who snapped and growled in pursuit, guardians of our home in that moment of peril. Instinct kicked in as I sprinted after him, my shouts lost in the tumult of the storm as he disappeared into the dense thicket of trees that bordered our property. The darkness swallowed him whole, leaving behind only the echo of his hurried footsteps fading into the night. Breathless and trembling, I dialed emergency services, the weight of adrenaline and fear pressing down upon me as I recounted the harrowing encounter. Within moments, the comforting presence of flashing lights and stern voices filled our yard as police officers combed through the woods, their K-9 units scouring the underbrush for any sign of the intruder who had violated our sanctuary. It wasn't long before they found him, huddled and shivering beneath the canopy of gnarled branches, his ragged clothes clinging to his emaciated frame. He offered no resistance as they led him away, his eyes haunted and hollow, a silent testament to the hardships that had driven him to seek refuge in the shadows of our shed. Later, we learned the grim truth, that he was a homeless man, adrift in a world that had forgotten him, seeking shelter wherever he could find it, even at the risk of trespassing into the lives of others. His makeshift dwellings had dotted the outskirts of town, unnoticed until the night our vigilant dogs had sensed his presence, their protective instincts roused by the threat lurking within our midst. Gratitude mingled with unease in the days that followed, as we grappled with the unsettling realization that our sanctuary had been breached. The dogs, ever loyal and watchful, had proven their worth beyond measure that rainy night, their vigilant presence a shield against the unknown. From that day forward, we became more vigilant about locking doors and securing our property, mindful of the fragile boundary that separated safety from vulnerability. The memory of that night lingered, a testament to the fragility of our sense of security and the unwavering loyalty of those who stood guard against the darkness that prowled just beyond our doorstep. Every year, our village came alive with the vibrant festivities of summer, an occasion marked by laughter, music, and the tantalizing aromas of street vendors' offerings. Yet, beneath the jovial facade, lurked a shadow, an unsettling tradition of eerie occurrences that marred the tranquil nights during the festival. 2 years ago, as the village bustled with preparations, I returned home from a late-night stroll to find myself confronted by an inexplicable dread. A hooded figure, cloaked in darkness, skulked near my house, its presence ominous against the backdrop of flickering streetlights. Intrigued yet wary, I watched from the shadows as it prowled the periphery of my home, its intent veiled by the veil of night. Curiosity turned to fear when it approached my window, its hooded gaze fixated on the dimly lit interiors. Panic surged within me, a primal instinct urging me to safeguard the sanctuary of my home. "Leave!" I cried out, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. Startled, the figure recoiled, its form melting into the enveloping darkness as it vanished into the night. Shaken but resolute, I bolted the doors and secured the windows, my heart racing with unanswered questions that lingered in the air like an unspoken threat. That night, sleep eluded me, haunted by the phantom presence that had dared to breach the sanctity of my home. Exactly a year later, as the festival's festive cheer once again echoed through the village, I found myself ensnared in a chilling déjà vu, a ghostly echo of the past that refused to be silenced. Restless from memories that haunted me like shadows, I retired to bed, a wary sentinel amidst the nocturnal symphony of celebration. It was in the darkest hours before dawn, when the veil between reality and nightmare was torn asunder. A faint creak echoed through the silence, a soft whisper of intrusion that roused me from uneasy slumber. Eyes snapping open, I beheld a sight that froze the blood in my veins. The screen door, once secured, now swung open with a ghostly invitation. Heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination, I crept towards the living room, a flickering tableau illuminated by the moon's pallid glow. There, bathed in the silvery light, stood the hooded figure, a specter of dread that stared back at me through the pane of glass, its presence a chilling reminder of unresolved terror. Instinct seized me, a frantic scramble for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed emergency services, my voice a desperate plea against the encroaching darkness. The figure lingered, its hooded visage etched with malevolence as it met my gaze, a silent testament to the malevolent dance that had ensnared us both in its macabre embrace. Sirens wailed in the distance, a symphony of salvation that heralded the arrival of law enforcement, their flashing lights casting an ephemeral beacon of hope amidst the encroaching shadows. Yet, as swiftly as it had materialized, the hooded figure dissolved into the night, leaving behind only the haunting echoes of its spectral visitation. In the aftermath of that harrowing night, I found solace in the reassurance of friends and the fortification of defenses, a vigilant sentinel against the recurring specter that stalked the festival's ephemeral embrace. With the next festival approaching, I have taken precautions, enlisting the companionship of a trusted friend to stand sentinel against the encroaching darkness, a resolute defiance against the unspoken horrors that lurk within the shadowed corners of our world. Yet, beneath the facade of preparedness, a lingering unease gnaws, a chilling reminder that some mysteries defy rationality, that some fears are born not of flesh and blood, but of the unseen terrors that haunt the twilight realms of the human soul. My junior year of college was marked by late-night study sessions, carefree moments with friends, and the thrill of living in an old ramshackle house just off campus. Nestled among towering trees that whispered secrets in the wind, our home was a haven for laughter and camaraderie, despite its worn-out facade and creaking floorboards. One chilly autumn evening, the house stood unusually quiet, its usual lively atmosphere subdued by the absence of my 4 roommates who had ventured out for various social engagements. I relished the solitude, relishing the opportunity to catch up on assignments undisturbed. As the night deepened and the house settled into a hushed stillness, an eerie sensation prickled the back of my neck, a faint, unsettling sound echoing from the shadows of the staircase leading to the second floor. Initially dismissing it as the house settling, I returned to my books, the soft glow of my desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. But the noise persisted, a faint creaking of stairs, followed by the muffled shuffle of footsteps that seemed to echo through the empty halls. Heart pounding, with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, I abandoned my books and cautiously ascended the stairs, the wooden steps groaning softly beneath my weight. As I reached the landing, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, disheveled and unkempt, his eyes clouded with an unsettling mixture of confusion and desperation. His presence sent a jolt of fear coursing through my veins as I struggled to comprehend how he had gained entry into our supposedly secure home. Before I could voice my disbelief, he spoke, a raspy voice tinged with a hint of desperation, claiming to be a former resident of the house, seeking shelter from the cold embrace of the night. His words rang hollow, each syllable laced with an underlying sense of unease that only intensified my growing sense of dread. Summoning every ounce of courage, I demanded that he leave, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and authority. His reaction was unexpected, a surge of anger, twisting his features into a mask of defiance as he took a menacing step toward me, his presence looming ominously in the confined space. Instinct propelled me into action, a desperate dash down the staircase, the echo of his footsteps close behind as I fumbled for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed emergency services. The operator's voice offered a lifeline of reassurance as I relayed the harrowing ordeal unfolding within the confines of our once peaceful home. A tense game of cat and mouse ensued, a relentless pursuit up and down the labyrinthine staircases, the sound of our frantic footsteps reverberating through the empty corridors. Each fleeting moment stretched into an eternity, adrenaline fueling my desperate bid for survival as I navigated the treacherous terrain of our once familiar abode. Finally, with the distant wail of sirens cutting through the night, the intruder relented. A fleeting shadow retreating through the back door, leaving behind a trail of uncertainty and lingering fear. The arrival of law enforcement brought a semblance of security, their presence a comforting shield against the unseen threats that lurked in the shadows. In the aftermath of that fateful night, we fortified our defenses, bolstering locks, installing security cameras, and sharing an unspoken vow to remain vigilant against the specter of intrusion. Though the intruder vanished into the night, his presence lingered, a haunting reminder of the fragility of our sanctuary and the resilience forged in the crucible of fear. I lived in a typical suburban neighborhood, where houses lined neatly trimmed lawns and friendly waves greeted me every morning as I walked to my car. The Johnsons, my next-door neighbors, were a bustling family of 4. Theirs was a lively household with 2 young children, a pair of small dogs that yapped joyfully at every passerby, and parents whose heated arguments occasionally echoed through the thin walls. One evening, as I returned home from work, I heard raised voices coming from the Johnsons' backyard. Mr. Johnson and an older man, whom I assumed was his father, were engaged in a heated argument. I paused, feeling awkwardly intrusive yet unable to ignore the intensity of their confrontation. The argument escalated quickly, voices rising to a crescendo of anger before abruptly cutting off into an eerie silence. The following morning, the familiar sight of the Johnsons' white van, usually parked in their driveway, was conspicuously absent. I assumed they might have gone on a family trip, perhaps seeking to escape the tension that had gripped their home. Days turned into weeks, however, and the absence of any activity from their house became unsettling. No lights glowed in the evening, no children's laughter floated across the fence. It was a balmy evening when I first noticed a flicker of movement through the curtained windows of their house. Curiosity mingled with a growing sense of unease prompted me to investigate further. The front door, usually closed and welcoming, stood slightly ajar. With cautious steps, I approached, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the warm summer air. Inside, the house felt different, oppressive, suffused with an eerie silence that pressed down upon me like a weight. The air smelled stale, untouched by the usual sense of home-cooked meals or fresh laundry. As I ventured deeper into the hallway, the floorboards groaned underfoot, protesting the intrusion of my presence. A shadow darted across the living room, fleeting and indistinct as if trying to evade my gaze. Heart pounding, I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence greeted my ears, broken only by the faint rustle of curtains in a breeze that seemed to have no source. The whispering started then, a soft rasping sound that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. I strained to make out the words, but they were unintelligible, a garbled mix of syllables that sent a shiver down my spine. Suddenly, a loud thump echoed from upstairs, followed by a child's giggle, high-pitched and utterly out of place in the desolate silence of the house. My nerves frayed. I turned on my heels and fled, instinctively locking the door behind me, as if to keep whatever unseen presence lurked within from following. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the evening replayed in my mind like a macabre film reel. The memory of the shadow and the unsettling sounds refused to fade, haunting my thoughts and keeping sleep at bay. Just as I began to drift into a restless doze, 3 slow, deliberate knocks sounded on my front door. Hard in my throat, I stumbled out of bed, my footsteps hesitant as I approached the door. With trembling hands, I grasped the doorknob and swung it open. half expecting to confront some spectral figure or a child's ghostly visage. But the porch lay empty, bathed in the harsh glow of a street lamp, its light casting long, sinister shadows across the yard. In the weeks that followed, I watched as the Johnsons' house remained untouched and abandoned, a stark contrast to the lively home it once was. Neighbors murmured in hushed tones about the sudden disappearance of the family, speculating on what could have driven them away so abruptly. Some whispered of debts unpaid, others of dark secrets hidden behind closed doors. As time passed, the whispers in the night grew fainter, but never entirely disappeared. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I would hear those 3 knocks on my door again, followed by the distant echo of a child's laughter. Each time, I would peer into the darkness, half expecting to see the flicker of a curtain or the silhouette of a figure watching from afar. The Johnsons never returned, leaving their house a silent monument to unanswered questions and lingering dread. And though life in the neighborhood resumed its normalcy, with children playing and dogs barking in the sun-dappled streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, some presence, lingered in the shadows of that empty house, waiting patiently for the truth to be uncovered. It was a stifling summer night, the kind where the air hangs heavy and even the faintest sound seems amplified. I had just graduated from college, living in a small 2-story unit in a low-income housing complex funded by the government. The units were lined up in rows like a motel, and I shared walls with neighbors on both sides. On this particular night, I had wrapped up my shift late and arrived home around 11 p.m. Exhausted, I hurried through the routine of making a quick meal and stepping into the shower. The warm water was a welcome relief, but my relaxation was short-lived. After only about 5 minutes, the peaceful sound of running water was interrupted by a loud, insistent banging, echoing from downstairs. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood frozen in the shower, the sound of my own breathing drowning out everything else. The banging continued, each thud like a sledgehammer against my nerves. With trembling hands, I turned off the water and wrapped a towel around myself. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a neighbor? Someone at the wrong door? Carefully, I tiptoed down the stairs, the creaking wood beneath my feet adding to the eerie atmosphere. The front door loomed ahead, the source of the relentless pounding. As I approached, the dim light from the street lamp outside cast long shadows across the hallway. Just as I reached for the doorknob, the banging intensified once more, accompanied by an authoritative voice shouting something unintelligible from the other side. My pulse skyrocketed, fear turning my limbs to ice. Through the small glass pane in the door, a blinding beam of light pierced the darkness, followed by the unmistakable silhouette of a uniformed officer. "Police! Open the door slowly and put your hands up," the voice commanded. Terror gripped me as I complied with shaky hands, the cold metal of the doorknob chilling my palm. I opened the door slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Outside stood 2 police officers, their expressions tense and weapons drawn. "Step outside slowly and keep your hands visible," one of them ordered, their voices muffled by the pounding of blood in my ears. With trembling steps, I obeyed, stepping out onto the porch under the harsh glare of the streetlight. The officers quickly secured me and guided me away from the doorway, their eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced vigilance. "We received reports of a suspect matching a murder suspect's description trying to enter units in this building," one of them explained, their words barely registering through the haze of fear. They swept through my small unit, checking closets and rooms with a thoroughness that felt suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards and rustle of fabric seemed magnified in the tense silence. After what felt like an eternity, they assured me the area was clear, offering apologies for the frightful intrusion. "Lock your doors and windows tonight, and call us immediately if you hear or see anything suspicious," they advised before disappearing into the night. Shaken, but grateful for their presence, I returned to my bed, trying to calm my racing thoughts. However, sleep eluded me. Hours passed in restless unease until the darkness outside began to fade, replaced by the tentative light of dawn filtering through my window. Just as the first rays of sunlight bathed the room in a soft glow, a faint noise stirred me from the brink of exhausted slumber. It was subtle at first, a quiet shuffle from across the hallway, the spare bedroom I rarely used. Panic surged anew as I remembered the night's events. Without hesitation, I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, my voice barely steady as I relayed the situation to the dispatcher. As I spoke, the faint shuffle turned into frantic movements. The bedroom door burst open with a violent crash, the sound tearing through the silence like a thunderclap. Through bleary eyes, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure, a shadowy silhouette racing down the stairs and towards the back door with alarming speed. My heart pounded in my throat as I heard the door slam shut with a resounding thud, echoing through the empty house. By the time the police arrived, the intruder was long gone, leaving behind only a chilling reminder of their intrusion. A slashed screen on one of the back windows, a testament to their determined escape. In the days that followed, I lived in a state of heightened vigilance, haunted by the memory of that night. I installed extra locks on my doors, checked and rechecked the windows before bed, and never again took my safety for granted. The incident left an indelible mark on my psyche, a constant reminder that danger could lurk just beyond the familiar walls of home. In high school, I had a side gig house sitting for my wealthy aunt and uncle whenever they jetted off on their frequent vacations. Their sprawling estate nestled on the outskirts of town was a dream for a teenager used to cramped dorm rooms and busy classrooms. One Saturday night, I decided to host a low-key birthday bash for a close friend there, taking advantage of the expansive living space and privacy. The evening unfolded with laughter, music, and a few too many drinks. By 2 a.m., the last of my friends had departed, leaving behind a faint trail of discarded cups and plates. Determined to earn my keep, I set about cleaning up the aftermath of our impromptu celebration. The silence that settled over the house felt almost eerie after the lively gathering. As I finished tidying up, exhaustion weighed heavily on me. I decided to crash on the couch rather than trek up to one of the guest rooms. It wasn't long before weariness overtook me, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. Sometime later, I was jolted awake by the insistent chime of the doorbell echoing through the house. Groggy and disoriented, I stumbled to the front door, assuming it was a friend who had forgotten something in their rush to leave. But when I swung the door open, there was no one in sight. Just the stillness of the night and the faint glow of the porch light. I frowned, perplexed by the prank or mistake that had woken me. With a shrug, I closed the door and trudged back to the couch, hoping to salvage what was left of the night's sleep. But, as soon as I settled back into the cushions, the doorbell rang again, this time in quick succession, 4 or 5 times in rapid-fire succession. Annoyance flared within me, fueled by the interruption of my rest. I stormed back to the door, peering through the curtains into the darkness beyond. The street lay empty and quiet, devoid of any sign of mischief-makers or late-night revelers. Frustration mounting, I scanned the porch and front yard, half expecting to catch a glimpse of someone darting away in the shadows. But the night offered no clues, just an unsettling silence. Exasperated, I returned to the couch, my thoughts racing. Who would play such a bizarre prank, and why target this house, of all places? The unease settled in, casting a shadow over the remainder of the night. Morning dawned with a hesitant light filtering through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Stepping out onto the porch to retrieve the morning paper, I froze in my tracks. Taped to the front door was a note, hastily scrawled in jagged letters. If you want a really fun night, leave the door unlocked next time. A chill raced down my spine as I read the ominous message. Fear and confusion warred within me. Who had been lurking outside in the darkness, watching and waiting? What did they mean by fun? The implications sent a shiver through me, and I knew I had to share this unsettling encounter with my aunt and uncle when they returned. Their arrival brought a sense of relief mingled with apprehension. I recounted the strange events of that night, the note clutched tightly in my hand as evidence of something deeply unsettling. Concern etched lines on their faces as they listened, their brows furrowing in worry. "We'll take care of this," my uncle assured me, his voice firm with resolve. True to their word, they wasted no time in installing a state-of-the-art Ring doorbell camera, a modern sentinel watching over the house day and night. Yet, despite the added security, a lingering unease settled over me whenever I found myself alone in the house after dark. Subsequent house-sitting duties became fraught with tension, each creak of the floorboards and every rustle of the wind outside heightening my senses. The reassurance of technology offered little comfort against the backdrop of that unsettling note and the mystery of who had left it. The sanctuary of my aunt and uncle's home had been tainted by a shadow I couldn't shake, a reminder that even in the most serene settings, darkness could lurk just beyond the threshold. To save money, I rented a cheap apartment in a rough part of town. The building, an aging relic with cracked walls and flickering lights, seemed to exhale a musty odor that lingered no matter how much I cleaned. It wasn't long before I realized the place came with its own set of quirks and dangers, starting with the mysterious disappearance of the previous tenant, Sam. Sam's departure was shrouded in rumors and unanswered questions. Every other day, strangers knocked on my door, looking for him with faces ranging from anxious concern to outright hostility. Some claimed he owed them money, others hinted at darker secrets. I kept to myself, hoping the noise and curiosity would eventually die down. One night, however, the apartment's eerie ambiance escalated from unsettling to downright terrifying. It was around 3 a.m. when the sound of my front door creaking open jolted me awake. Heart pounding, I grabbed the only form of defense I had, a baseball bat stashed under my bed, and tiptoed towards the living room. There, illuminated by a faint street lamp's glow filtering through the blinds, stood a man in black. He was hunched over, muttering to himself, his unkempt hair and bloodshot eyes reflecting the dim light. "Gary sent me to fix the toilet," he mumbled, more to himself than to me. I mustered up the courage to confront him. "Who are you and what are you doing in my house?" Startled, he looked up, his gaze piercing through the darkness. "I'm at the right place, right?" His voice wavered, uncertain. "No," I replied firmly, trying to mask my fear. "Sam doesn't live here anymore. You have the wrong address." His expression shifted from confusion to realization, and then something darker crept over his features. "Sam owes Gary a lot of money," he said slowly, his tone dropping to a threatening whisper. "If he's not here, where is he?" "I don't know," I insisted, my voice trembling despite my attempt at composure. "I moved in a few weeks ago. I have no idea where Sam went." He took a step closer, invading my personal space. "You'd better not be lying," he hissed, breath hot on my face. "Gary doesn't like liars." With that ominous warning hanging in the air, he turned and slinked out of the apartment, disappearing into the shadows of the night. I rushed to lock the door behind him, hands shaking uncontrollably. The encounter left me paralyzed with fear, my mind racing through all the possible reasons Sam had left and the dangers that might now be lurking around me. Days passed in a tense blur. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow dancing on the wall, felt like a harbinger of impending danger. I barely slept, jumping at the slightest noise. And then, a few nights later, my worst fears were realized. I woke abruptly, bathed in cold sweat, to the sound of heavy breathing just outside my bedroom door. Gripping the baseball bat like a lifeline, I held my breath, straining to hear any hint of movement. The doorknob began to turn slowly, emitting a faint, ominous creak as the door edged open inch by agonizing inch. In the pitch-black darkness of the room, I squinted, my heart hammering in my chest. There, in the narrow slit of light from the hallway, were two glinting orbs, eyes filled with malice and intent. It was the man from before, his presence now more menacing than ever. He wasn't just looking for Sam anymore, he was looking for me. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I swung the bat with all the force I could muster. It connected with a sickening thud, accompanied by a grunt of pain. The man stumbled back, cursing vehemently. before bolting down the hallway and disappearing into the night. Shaken and trembling, I immediately dialed emergency services. The police arrived swiftly, combing through the apartment and the surrounding area, but found no trace of the intruder. They took my statement, offered vague reassurances, and advised me to stay elsewhere for the night. I didn't need to be told twice. The next day, I packed my essentials in a daze, leaving behind the apartment that had become a living nightmare. The memories of that night haunted me. The heavy breathing, the malicious stare, the desperate swing of the bat. I moved out, but the fear stayed with me, an invisible weight on my shoulders, a reminder that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, even behind the door of a seemingly innocuous apartment. I had just moved to a small, quaint house in Florida, hoping for a fresh start. It was a charming place, though a bit old, with creaky floors and a musty smell that lingered in the humid air. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind where neighbors nodded politely but kept to themselves. Little did I know, the peaceful facade would soon crumble, revealing the true nature of my new home. The unsettling changes began subtly. At first, it was small things. A misplaced set of keys, a photo frame tilted askew after I had just straightened it. I dismissed them as absent-mindedness or the quirks of an old house settling into its rhythm. But soon, these incidents became more pronounced and unnerving. My pets, usually my fearless companions, were the first to show signs of distress. My dog, Max, a stout German shepherd known for his bravery, started growling at seemingly empty corners of rooms. He would bark fiercely, his ears pinned back as if confronting an invisible intruder. My cat, Luna, a typically aloof creature, became skittish, hissing at shadows that flickered across the walls and darting under furniture at the slightest noise. Nighttime brought a new layer of terror. Whispers floated through the air, soft and murmuring like distant conversations of children playing. But these were no ordinary children's voices. They were hollow, devoid of joy, carrying an eerie undercurrent that sent shivers down my spine. I lay awake in bed, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Desperate for answers, I sought out the maintenance man, Mr. Wilkins, a grizzled old-timer who had worked in the neighborhood for decades. His face darkened when I mentioned the strange occurrences in my house. He hesitated, as if debating whether to share something with me. Finally, he spoke in a low voice, his words laden with caution. "Others have experienced similar things in that house," he began, his voice gravelly with years of smoke and whiskey. "Tenants before you. They left in a hurry, complaining of bad luck and disturbances they couldn't explain. Some say the house has a history, a dark history." I pressed him for details, but he clammed up, shaking his head. "Best not to dig too deep into these things, son," he warned, his eyes darting nervously. "Some things are better left undisturbed." That night, as I lay in bed, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. It felt like a presence was pressing in on me, suffocating and oppressive. Against my better judgment, I found myself drawn to the attic, a place I had avoided since moving in. The attic door creaked open, revealing a darkness that seemed to swallow the feeble light of my flashlight. The air was thick with dust and age, and a chill ran down my spine as I stepped cautiously onto the wooden floorboards. I heard it then, a soft, mournful sobbing coming from the far corner. My heart raced, but curiosity mingled with fear drove me forward. In the dim light, I saw an old rocking chair, worn and dusty, swaying gently as if someone had just vacated it. The sobbing continued, echoing in the empty space. I approached slowly, my breath caught in my throat. Just as I reached out a trembling hand to touch the chair, the sobbing ceased abruptly. That's when I felt it, a cold hand, icy and clammy, gripping my shoulder with a force that paralyzed me. I spun around, my flashlight illuminating nothing but darkness and the faint outlines of boxes and cobwebs. There was no one there. Panic seized me, and I stumbled backward, tripping over a box and crashing to the floor. The attic seemed to close in around me, the walls closing in like the jaws of a trap. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain in my ankle, and fled the attic, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it with trembling hands. I sank to the floor, my heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. The scratches on the inside of the attic door, deep and fresh, mocked my rationalizations. Despite the terror that gripped me that night, I couldn't bring myself to leave. It was as if the house itself had ensnared me in its web, weaving a spell that held me captive. Each night, the disturbances escalated. Objects moved on their own. Shadows danced along the walls, and the whispers became frantic, urgent. One evening, I awoke to find myself standing in the hallway, my hand gripping the doorknob of the attic. I had no memory of how I got there, or what had compelled me to leave my bed. Fear coiled in my stomach like a snake as I stared at the attic door, willing myself not to turn the knob, not to confront whatever lay beyond. Days blurred into weeks, and I sank deeper into a state of constant dread. Sleep became elusive, haunted by nightmares of shadowy figures and echoing cries. I felt the eyes of unseen entities upon me, watching and waiting. The house seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, feeding off my fear like a parasite. One stormy night, as lightning split the sky and thunder shook the windows, I heard a voice, a raspy whisper that slithered through the darkness. "Leave," it hissed, sending a chill down my spine. "Leave this place before it consumes you." Trembling, I packed a few belongings into a duffel bag and made my decision. As I descended the creaky staircase for the last time, the whispers grew frantic, a cacophony of pleading and anguish. The front door slammed shut behind me, with a finality that echoed through the empty house. I never looked back as I drove away, leaving the haunted rental behind me. The memories of that house haunt me still, lingering like a ghostly imprint on my soul. I've since moved on, but I know that some wounds never fully heal, and sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I hear faint whispers carried on the wind, a reminder of the darkness that waits in the shadows just beyond the threshold of our reality.